Lecture 13, the Renaissance. There we go. Absolutely. And again, as we've built into the final portion of our course, certainly we've seen a lot of change in our last several lectures, in particular our last lecture, which examined the rise of commerce and the merchant in Western Europe. So certainly, again, as I mentioned, just to bring us back up to speed, without wealth, there's no art. Again, I know somebody out there is going to say, "Well, what about those cavemen in Lascaux, France? They had no money." Well, they might have had some things set aside where they could, have time to, do some painting on the walls. Or they found somebody creative enough to do that. They liked it. So, and with, no Xbox or PS5 or whatever it is now these days, they probably, gave the guy maybe an extra piece of meat at dinner, and he would make these nice paintings. Who knows? Anyway, I digress. So certainly, for me, the culmination of early Western civilization starts with the Renaissance, and as we'll see as we wrap up in our last few remaining lectures, we see that there is a lot of change occurring, and we're going to put all that change together, and it's all going to happen roughly at the same time, which is really amazing. I know for me, if I could go back in time in Western civilization, certainly one of the places I would want to be is right around the year. I would like to be in Western Europe right around the year 1500. All right, maybe for 10 or 15 years or so, and then after that, I'm out. Okay, because of so much change that's occurring, and so much, forces, social forces, political forces, economic forces, all coming to a head at that point. So, the Renaissance, as our notes say, literally means, it's French for rebirth, a renewal. All right, and we see a rebirth in classical literature, Greco-Roman literature, Greco-Roman philosophy, Greco-Roman art, politics, the law, and one of the big schools of philosophy that will help drive the Renaissance in so many different ways. Again, whether it's artistically, whether it's politically, even scientifically, will be the humanists, humanism, all right? And certainly the humanists, as we're going to find, would share a love for uncovering and reviving philosophy and literature of the Greco-Roman period. Certainly studying Latin, studying Greek, translating these works, the Greek works, the Roman works, out of Greek, out of Latin, and into native languages, the more modern languages such as Italian, would be a goal for the humanists. Certainly, philosophy, the humanists are going to question the institutions of the day. We're going to meet some of those humanist philosophers at the end of the lecture. But certainly, as we talked about, and also, too, in a separate lecture, we'll take a look at some of that humanistic art that would flourish first in Italy and later on in other parts of Western Europe. I will show you some works of art but in this lecture, but those works of art will be predominantly influenced by the economic engine that would drive this Renaissance forward. Certainly for me, and I think for many historians, we know that the Renaissance begins in Italy, and again, as we said, was fueled by the wealth of urban merchants. And Florence would be really the capital of the Italian Renaissance, much as Venice was the capital of the commercial revolution of the 12th and 13th centuries. And certainly Venice would still have great economic influence and power through at least the early 19th century. Florence becomes really the center of the Renaissance, of this rebirth. Certainly, you would have other city states and the your wealthier merchants in these city states throughout Italy, including Rome, including Venice, that were competitors in art commissions. All right. And one of the things I like to point out is that if you're somebody who's wealthy today, all right, there's a good number of wealthy people that like really like to display their wealth with some degree of ostentatiousness. They like to make sure that other people know that they're wealthy. All right. I mean, I know when my wife and I when we lived in Riverhead, we used to take our boat down through the Shinnecock Canal, and we used to throw the anchor out just on the northeast side of the Shinnecock Inlet, and right behind us would be you'd have the county park there, Shinnecock Inlet County Park, and then right behind, just next to that, would be all of these massive mansions, right? One of them was Calvin Klein's mansion, you name it. I mean, just massive mansions, and we used to we used to throw the anchor out right near a helipad, and sure enough, on Fridays you had these helicopters coming in and out, ferrying people. I'm like, oh God, this is so ostentatious. I guess if you're really rich, you have your own helicopter. I don't know. Anyway, but that's the idea, and certainly, whether it's a gold-plated Humvee, for these wealthy merchants, probably the most ostentatious way to display wealth was through art and by commissioning famous artists. All right, and certainly you would have competing families that would enlist the best artists of the day. Even the Pope himself, Pope Julius II in particular, who's Pope in the early years of the Renaissance, Italian Renaissance. Certainly, would hire out artists, whether it be Michelangelo, as we're going to see, in painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, which I'm going to show you. I did visit it, but they don't let you take pictures in there, so I ripped a picture off the internet. And Raphael as well, all right, which again we mentioned. I think I mentioned already. But certainly in Florence, you had two competing families, and the two families that really were at the height of their wealth and power were the Medicis and the Borgias. All right, and for the Medicis, Michelangelo was their artist, their number one artist in their stable. All right, and we'll show you some of his work in a little bit. And the of the Medicis, and again, when you think about the Medicis and the Borgias, just think mafia. All right, Medicis were bankers. They had the Medici Bank. Certainly, they were engaged in commerce as well. And the Borgias were also a merchant family, originally from Spain. And certainly they, of the two, and I'm sure if you're into watching shows about the Medicis or the Borgias, and there's some good shows out there on these families. You know how ruthless they were. I mean, again, they were the mafia. Let's just put it in no uncertain terms. And it would be Lorenzo de' Medici that would really be the member of the Medici family that would put Michelangelo at the forefront of this Renaissance humanist art movement. Certainly, the Catholic Church would fight against these more humanist liberal ideas in art and science, whether it's trying to censor art. Certainly, individuals, even later on through the 1600s, people like Galileo, right, who would suffer house arrest, for refusing to recant his findings of living in that the Earth was part of a heliocentric solar system, which went against the teachings and doctrines and beliefs of the Catholic Church. And even more minor, I would say minor Catholics, but certainly more localized rulers. And let me swing over to this painting. And again, I don't know if I don't think I threw this into your notes, so I apologize. He was a last minute entry, and I'm kind of in a rush to finish these lectures so you guys can have everything you need. This is a painting, and again, I don't like this copy, this JPEG I ripped off the internet. I didn't do a great job, but you can kind of make out that this is the city of Florence. On the far left, towards the background, you have the famous Duomo, right? The famous domed Basilica of Florence, right, which dominates the landscape. You have the Palazzo Vecchio in the straight in the background there with the tower, which I toured in Florence. And to the right, behind the three arches, which is basically a seating area full of other sculptures commissioned by the Medicis that would be completed by Michelangelo. To the right would be the Uffizi, and the Uffizi was really initially were the offices of the Medici family. The Medici certainly had amassed artworks, and eventually it becomes the Uffizi Gallery, right, which we visited in Florence 2 years ago. But this is a painting that recreates the execution of a Dominican priest named Girolamo Savonarola, and he was executed in 1498. And long story short, the Medicis had been exiled in 1492 out of Florence. They'd been pushed out of Florence by all sorts of forces, including the Borgias. And that allowed reformers like Savonarola, who was a Catholic priest, again, he was a Dominican priest, to seize power in the Florentine Republic. And he reigned for about 4 years. And he invoked many reforms that would try to undo this urge to have humanist art created. And by 1498, in 1497, he was excommunicated by the Pope, who was a Borgia. And in 1498, he would be tried and executed, burned here in the, hanged and burned, actually, in the Piazza della Signoria. Now, I saw this painting in your textbook, and I remember thinking, I was at a bar. Cafe, in this piazza, and here I am looking at this painting of this Dominican priest being burned to death. Oh, I need another drink. Okay, and I sat in that area over there too. It's pretty. Now it's Florence it's an amazing city. It's a beautiful city. It was so hot when we were there. Oh my God, it was so hot. We were in that. I think I mentioned that Saharan heat bubble. All right, so let me flip back. So certainly, even people on the ground, not necessarily say the Pope, but certainly even there were lesser Catholic reformers who pushed back against humanism and this rising interest in humanist art and philosophy, as Savonarola called it, in trying to destroy these Renaissance art pieces. He called it the bonfires of the vanities. All right, which, if you know your modern American literature, you know this book, The Bonfire of the Vanities, an excellent book by Tom Wolfe. He's that author that wears white. He wears a white suit. That's his thing. Okay, yeah. Okay, so certainly, again, as if we were to go back to our map of Italy that we had up last week in our last lecture, certainly you would see there be various regions, all right? So, for instance, Florence was the center of power for the Republic of Florence, which governed over, basically what would be a good part of Tuscany, all right? You would have Genoa, you would have Venice, which governed over Veneto, right? The region, just north of Venice. So these city-states tried many forms of government, including republicanism. For again, Florence itself would be a republic for a while. At some point, by the 1600s, it would become more authoritarian. And even with being a republic, certainly being wealthy merchant families like the de Medicis or the Borgias, they're going to exude their influence over that Republican government. All right, when you tour through the Palazzo Vecchio, you really get the sense that those who were in power, whether it would have been the Medicis, who did reside in the Palazzo Vecchio, all right, when they were in power, certainly you get the sense that even with the Republic, these individuals really exuded a lot of influence over the business and the governing, if you will. All right. And again, we as we mentioned last week, that rise in wealth through commerce that would make the merchant class of the Italian city-states and later on other cities throughout Western and Northern Europe, they would become the political wheeler dealers. They would become the individuals who were, in control. Again, you didn't necessarily have to be come from nobility. All right. They created their own houses, if you will. Just like you would have the House of Lancaster in England. The House of Tudor, the House of Stuart. Certainly, the House of Medici would extend its influence just as well. All right, as say any of the other more established houses of nobility. And again, as we mentioned, the Borgias and the Medicis, they were ruthless, they were bloody, they were scheming. They write their own TV shows. I mean, that's how good they are. I mean, you don't even have to create, this. It's absolutely, it just writes itself. So again, we take a look. Again, we talk about the influence, the money that went into creating humanist art. All right, and again, in visiting Florence, we discovered that there's not one, but there's actually 3 Davids. All right, and certainly in the upper right-hand corner, that's at the Accademia. That's the one that everybody lines up for. And again, we didn't stand on line. We made reservations. We had the passes in advance. The line was around the block. And even though there are a myriad of other works of medieval and Renaissance art in the Accademia, which sits just a few blocks north of the Duomo. Certainly the piece that everybody comes to see is Michelangelo Buonarroti's David. And we had the opportunity as well in traveling between Florence and La Spezia, and then back from La Spezia. La Spezia is north of Florence and up on the Ligurian coast. And then from La Spezia back down to Rome. We went past Carrara, where you could see the marble quarries up in the foothills of the Apennine Mountains. You could see how the slopes were cut away, and you could see the exposed marble, right? Which now, certainly today, when we think marble, we think like marble countertops. It's maybe marble flooring in your bathroom if we're lucky. But that's the marble. And Buonarroti, who grew up in the foothills of the Apennines, grew up near Carrara, would go up to Carrara, go up into those quarries to find the marble pieces he wanted to use to sculpt. And again, when you look at what Michelangelo does with marble, it's absolutely amazing. For us, I think the Pietà at St. Peter's Basilica, Michelangelo's Pietà, is absolutely incredible. It's smooth as butter, and in terms of looking at taking something that's extremely hard, but yet making it into something that looks like it could move at a moment's notice. And again, you see the almost the Hellenic influence in terms of the body, the physical condition of the human body. Certainly, even in some of his other sculptures, you'll see more Hellenistic points of view. You'll see the ripples of fat, body fat, things like that. So, and the 3 things that stand out, that Michelangelo uses with David is the head is actually slightly out of proportion. It's a little larger, right? Because an artist needs a creative brain, all right? And then the hands. The hands are also out of proportion as well. They're large too, because a good artist needs a steady hand, right, to help that creative brain bring this artwork to life, right? So, and then the arms. The arms are actually out of proportion. They're larger as well, all right? Again, that you need strength and you need patience as well. And again, just to go around, so if we go to the left, that's the same statue, if you will, of David by Michelangelo Buonarroti outside the Palazzo Vecchio, he's facing, well, not facing, his body's facing, his head's looking left towards the Uffizi Gallery, but his body is facing the Piazza della Signoria. And then the bottom, David, all right, is found across the Arno River on top of a hill right above the gardens. Not the Boboli Gardens. Boboli Gardens are further down towards the Ponte Vecchio, the old bridge, with all the buildings on it, right? That the Nazis nearly destroyed when they were evacuating in Florence in World War II. And Lorenzo also commissioned Michelangelo Buonarroti to create the tombs for the Medici family. And you can find these in Florence at the Medici Chapel. I know that the day my wife and mother-in-law, they went up into the Tuscan countryside to go to a cooking class. My daughter and I, we stayed behind in Florence, and we decided, you know what, let's go to Medici Chapel. We'll go see the Medici tombs. And we ended up going to Dante's house, as I mentioned already. And I thought, oh, God, we're going to, do we have to stand online? We walked right in. It was awesome. And there was hardly anybody in the tombs. I'm thinking, who's not coming here to see up close and personal some of Michelangelo's most incredible work? Absolutely incredible work. And here we have, and I always get this wrong. This is day on the left, on top of the tomb. Day's on the left. I'm sorry, night's on the left, and day is on the right. Night's on the left because you can see the owl, right, which comes out at night, right, guarding her nest. You see the mask of the dreams, whether it's a dream or a nightmare. And certainly night is in repose. And then day is, and you can see how Michelangelo leaves Day's head, his face, it's unfinished because the sun is rising and you're coming out of a slumber, all right? And then one of the other tombs here, we have dawn and dusk, right? Dawn and dusk. And again, dawn is on the left a little more. I think dawn's on the left, if I remember right. I'm trying to see here. I could be wrong. But dawn and dusk. And again, you can see these are the marble that's used here is absolutely incredible. And then certainly this is St. Peter's Basilica, Vatican City, right? And we're standing here in St. Peter's Square. And you can see up above the columns on the left, it says Alexander the Seventh, all right? But the St. Peter's, this basilica was the dome was designed by Michelangelo. Again, he would paint, and again, if you go to the dome, go to your right, and you'll see a roof just to the right edge of the basilica. That's the Sistine Chapel. All right, that's the Sistine Chapel. And what's amazing is that, we tend to forget. We talk about Rome, back at the end of Unit 1 and beginning of Unit 2, that Rome is situated on several hills, right? And the city kind of sits in between. And Vatican City sits on the edge. And so when we came out of the Sistine Chapel, we were touring the Vatican Museum, instead of going back to the entrance of the Vatican Museum, which would put us outside the Vatican City, we snuck down stairs that my wife found out about. Got to give props to Mrs. P for that, because that was a great call. And there was a big set of stairs that walked us down from the Sistine Chapel down to that big arch on the right. And then from there, we were able to easily enter St. Peter's Basilica. We walked right in, but we only needed reservations for the Vatican Museum. You could walk into St. Peter's Basilica, with no problem. And certainly you can see the marble statues that surround the Basilica in St. Peter's Square. Again, they were all commissioned by Pope Julius, and they were to be created by Michelangelo and his team of sculptors, his assistants, his apprentices. So there you go. So, but again, this is also a tremendous example of of Renaissance art. That even Pope Julius embraced the humanism of Renaissance art. But again, we'll come back more to the details of Renaissance painting later on. Let's get back to politics and social issues. Again, and the embodiment of political power and the exercise of political power in the Renaissance, and particularly the Italian Renaissance. But again, we would see this in England as well later on, and certainly in France as well, is embodied in a small book by Niccolo Machiavelli called The Prince. The Prince. And we tend to give Machiavelli credit for being the first modern political thinker. And he argued that leaders should be ruthless, but at the same time virtuous, which, you got to be able to make decisions, and certainly sometimes those decisions may seem like they're ruthless, but certainly you have to have that ambition, to be that leader as well. Machiavelli, most recently, there was a study done by political scientists that argued that Machiavelli's writing of The Prince was more satire than it was a study in politics. That perhaps, he saw, that maybe ruthlessness was not the way to go. That perhaps the ends don't justify the means. But who knows? Who knows? Poor Niccolo Machiavelli. Okay. So, in terms of living in Renaissance society, again, to be that burgeoning merchant, men would marry later in life. That the idea for men was to gain that wealth first. All right. And so, you become the prince of the city, if you will. All right. Florence, as we mentioned in particular. All right. And so marrying later in life meant that single prosperous men in Italy's cities would allow for the growth of prostitution, sodomy, love triangles, all right, between wives and mistresses, all right, and even justified. These actions were justified by Renaissance writers, including Braccioli, whose work whose works included if you will, he would write about Renaissance society. So Braccioli's work on avarice, right, greed. All right, avarice, greed does not subvert the soul, upset the mind, or impede the study of literature, the acquisition of knowledge. Without wealth, no one would build churches. All artistic activity would cease, and confusion would result if everyone were satisfied with enough only for himself. All right. So, again, to quote from the 1987 film Wall Street, where Michael Douglas says, "Greed, for lack of a better word, is good." All right, and that's according to, again, that typifies, that growing merchant class, and the idea of gaining wealth, all right, and putting things off for later. But again, that allows for the growth of other vices and behaviors, all right, as well. Okay. Certainly we would see, as the Renaissance spreads, as wealth spreads, as commerce spreads from the Mediterranean basin up through Northern Europe and Western Europe, certainly there would be some similarities. and shared ideas. For instance, England, France, and Germany would share a need to reform the corrupt Catholic Church. And again, we're going to come into that more when we get into the Protestant Reformation, all right, in 2 lectures. A growth of prosperity, and again, we see that as well. And certainly a growth of humanistic art. We're going to see some Northern European Renaissance art, as we also look at some Italian Renaissance art as well in our next lecture. And again, to kind of come back to our hang on. Bring that up. Okay. Come back to what we had said in the beginning. When we think about humanism, right? It's the idea is really challenging the traditions and the influence of the Catholic Church. All right, and certainly I've got different humanist thinkers and philosophers from different parts of Europe. I've got Erasmus, who's from Flanders, modern-day Belgium, Rabelais from France, Cervantes from Spain, and Sir Thomas More from England. All right, and as a matter of fact, Erasmus, in one of his works, he dedicated to Sir Thomas More. As well. So certainly, they were all traveling in similar circles, or at least, staying in contact. At least 2 of them were staying in contact with each other. But Erasmus would lay out the idea that religion is accessible to all people. All right. It's clearly revealed in the Bible that you don't necessarily need the church to conduct that teaching. And that's going to have also an influence on a young Augustinian priest named Martin Luther. And again, we're going to get with him, or into Luther's life and work and thinkings when we get to the Protestant Reformation, and there'll be a video documentary on Luther, which is narrated by Liam Neeson. We have no time. Okay. That's my Liam Neeson impersonation. It's terrible, I know. Rabelais, a French philosopher, argued, again, individuals should enjoy the world and be free from fear of a vengeful God. Now, again, when you think about how those Florentine merchants would live their lives, there it is, the idea of basking in worldly glow, what became known as civic humanism, right? You have Cervantes, right, in his book Don Quixote, right, would satirize Spanish church authority and the ideas of knighthood and chivalry, all right? Everything that would make Catholic Spain a powerful entity, all right? Its connections with the Catholic Church, its formidable knights and all of that he was satirizing, he was poking fun at, no pun intended, with his little lance and his donkey, right? Okay. There's a joke there, but I'm going to keep going. And then Sir Thomas More, who was a Catholic English noble, trained in the law. He was a lawyer. And he played with the idea of a society without property ownership in his work, Utopia. Right, Utopia. So again, just playing with the idea, not necessarily endorsing the idea, right? Okay. And no religion too? No, that's John Lennon. Right, okay. Imagine that. All right. Okay, so let's bring it home. And again, we kind of sum up Greco-Roman humanism, whether it's in print. For instance, you have... Let's go back to my notes here. Hang on. And like, for instance, you've got the 3 diamonds of Florentine literature. We mentioned Dante already, right? He's pre-Renaissance. We have Boccaccio, who wrote about the bubonic plague, right, in Decameron, and then Petrarch, who would be the one of the first Renaissance writers to come out of Florence. And then you had others. Marsilio Ficino, who was commissioned by the Medici family to translate Plato's works into Italian and printed. And certainly, what's going to help push, as I mentioned at the top of our lecture, push these Greco-Roman, classical concepts and philosophies and ideas, whereas that many of these works would be translated into contemporary languages, which again would allow for the dissemination of these ideas. Okay, so let's in our next lecture we're going to take a look at some art, and what I've done is I've given you I've given you your artwork that we'll examine together and analyze, and I gave you a list of the artwork, and that way you can take notes as you go. Again, it's if you're an art history buff, if you're an artist and you've done your studies in art and certainly Renaissance art, don't be offended. All right, many of the paintings that I picked were really picked primarily to show one, to show the changes in technique and style, and two, the history. Right, some of these artworks reflect the history of the time. Right, and certainly biblical history and all that, but really some of them are picked to reflect the history of the time. All right, as well, and again to demonstrate the social change, the economic change, the political change that was occurring. Okay, we'll see you on the next lecture.